Hey everyone, today I'm doing another skill priority guide, or leveling guide, however you choose to interpret this time for Arcanists. Arcanists are a very powerful class in the game, though largely alignment locked to the Old Faith side, so if you're doing a Christian run, you're primarily going to be using Ector unless you choose to take Merlin during Act 2, and then you'll have to deal with some loyalty issues, but it is possible to get that loyalty up if you send him on a bunch of the correct events, but then that means he's going to be sitting out on missions and stuff. It's a little bit of a hassle, so most of the stuff is going to be for your Old Faith runs. Most Arcanists have a sort of very similar core to their toolkits. It's their hexes. This is a set of spells that pretty much all of the Arcanists have, and it's a very powerful core to their kit. However, where they really start to vary is their offensive spells. What do they have to dish out damage? And depending on what their offensive spells are, can really sort of change the order or priority for certain Arcanists and what you want to get first. For some of them, you just pick up the hexes first. Others, offensive spells, some you go back and forth. And that's what I'm going to cover today in this video and kind of show you what I prefer to pick up first as I go along with each individual Arcanist. Beginning with Ector, you get him very early in the game, one of the first heroes you recruit. You start off with him at level 2, I believe, so you're going to be putting in a lot of the skill points as you go. You're not going to be able to respec and have sort of a lump sum to mess around with. Now, the first thing I always get with Ector is Slowing Hex, and then the upgrade of Witchcraft to reduce the cost by 1. If you're playing on higher difficulties, especially very hard, Slowing Hex is actually really, really good. The ability to slow down a priority target, prevent them from reaching you, and then deal with their weaker minions as they rush ahead of the elite mini-boss, whatever, the tough enemy, and you burn them down first ahead of time. Additionally, since his basic attack is Force Bolt, so he has knockback, being able to slow them and knock them back just really double dips on the crowd control for single target and is very effective for staggering the flow of enemies at you. This is a very, very good skill. The next one I pick up is Magical Armor, as well as the upgrade with Reinforced Armor, so that way you get extra armor at the beginning of combat. This extra armor does help lower their priority on the enemy threat list. When the enemy AI scans your party for who they want to attack, they will generally avoid targets that are going to not take a lot of damage from them. They're going to focus whatever will take the most. So by giving them a bunch of armor, depending on your party comp, Ector may no longer actually be the first person they go for, even if he is the squishiest once that one hit wears off. Next, after that, I pick up Long Reach. Having extra range is always very, very useful. The Spellcraft is also good for hitting those checks to get the blessings off of the totems and maybe finding some extra loot. Some people I know do like to pick up extra armor breaking and some extra damage on their Force Bolt. This isn't bad, but this is a fairly low priority thing to take on, especially this early. Once you move on into Tier 2, while Death Hex is an absolutely amazing ability, I find that it's not the most impactful this early on in the game. So the first thing I take is Fire Blast. It's going to be one of the first 3x3 AoEs you're going to get in the game, probably the first if you're using him consistently, and it's also range, so this is a huge deal. This opens up your party's capability to damage multiple enemies at once tremendously. After this, I go to get Master of Hexes to increase the effectiveness on my hex intensity, so that way the slows are more efficient, as well as the other effects from these other two abilities that I'll get to here in a second. And then pick up the upgrades for Earth Scorcher and Firestarter. This extra burning damage after the initial hit can really go a long way. Now after that, Potent Hex probably isn't a bad pick. I don't think it's maybe the most important. Maybe you'll want to go for Ancestral Hex or Corrupt Armor. Again, none of these are really that bad, but I like to circle back for Blood Hex. Being able to reduce enemy damage is very useful for obviously keeping the rest of your party alive if there's a bruiser coming in who you know is going to be hitting pretty hard, and getting the cooldown reduction on it is probably the most important thing. Being able to cycle your cooldowns on an Arcanist is quickly as possible is pretty much always a top priority. Following Blood Hex, then I would probably go for Potent Hex, and then Ancestral Hex, and then probably Hemophilia. I don't usually pick up Death Hex until later on. If you know that you really like Death Hex, go ahead and pick it up. It's not bad by any means. I just think that there are some abilities that are better on Ector earlier on in the game, whereas Death Hex becomes absolutely phenomenal in the later game. Getting into Tier 3, and this is going to be the case for every single Arcanist that has Mindstorm, so that's all of them but Merlin. The first thing you do is pick up Mindstorm. This is the most important skill on an Arcanist, and pretty much the core ability to their primary gameplay loop. Being able to spam spells, cycle cooldowns, and just get a bunch of hexes out there on a bunch of different enemies, and maybe a couple offensive spells like 2 Fire Blasts in a single turn as well. Following that up, I usually pick up Spell Power because it's extra damage and extra range, which are both very, very good. Then following this, I kind of go into Master of Fire, as Fire Blast is Ector's primary skill. Boosting the fire damage on this, the burn damage, is pretty important for his DPS, or I guess I should say DPR. Now, following these, getting quick casting is very important. Once you're able to get this, if you did pick up Witchcraft early, sometimes if you know you're going to be taking this, you don't want to because it's a waste of a skill point. But if you did, you would want to respec here, so that way when you get quick casting, this no longer becomes necessary, as you cannot reduce the cost down to 0. Following that, getting Death Hex is going to be very useful at this point. Getting all of the cooldown reduction that you can get, so here on Death Hex, and then increasing just the hex intensity on anything that offers it. And once you've gotten through all of that, go back for this, so that way Magical Armor lasts for 2 hits. That's going to be very good. And that's really the super important things. After that, you can kind of mess around with what you think you want. If you want Wall of Flame, you can pick it up. I don't use it super often, but it does have its uses. Maybe you want to get the triple Force Bolt. That's okay, not the best I think, but I don't think it's a bad one. The only abilities that I think you should avoid, these are like the absolute lowest priority skills, is Master Alchemist and Spell Resistance. These two I just never use, and I never feel like I need them. Everything else I think does have some use, and some of them will kind of fill in at different points of the leveling process when you have an extra skill point and you're waiting to move on to the next tier. But this is what I think is kind of the highest priority abilities and sort of acting as the core to Ector's gameplay. Moving on to Morgana, the Old Faith alignment point locked hero. Because she is the second hero you unlock through the Old Faith alignment, she actually will be pretty high level when you first get her, like around level 15, I think. I don't remember exactly. And you get her fairly late into the game. And you're going to want to respec her when you first get her. But because of this, you have a lot of skill points to mess around with when you first acquire her. The first thing you're, of course, going to want as you make your way down the skill tree is Magical Armor. That's useful on everyone. And then the two most important upgrades, I think, is Reinforced Armor, Extended Armor, and to a somewhat lesser extent, Enchanted Armor. You're going to want Glacial Strike. This is an amazing ability, super high damage, single target debuff. Reduce the cost on it, increase the damage, reduce the cooldown. This one is a bit optional. I personally really like it, but I know some people may not because it does increase the AP cost back up to 5, and some people may want it down at 4. But giving a freeze on it is also very, very good. And then pick up Blood Hex, reduce the cooldown. Moving down to Tier 2, you're going to pick up Slowing Hex. You do not need to pick up Witchcraft, and you're going to want to then grab Ice Thorns, have it apply Chill, reduce the cost, increase the damage. This is an amazing AoE ability, 4x4. Not many AoEs have a 4x4, so you can get a lot of damage with this. And then Master of Ice to increase the effectiveness of your Chill and Freeze effects, Frozen Power, and Enhanced by Cold. I'm bad at math, so I'm not sure if you've unlocked Tier 3 by this point. If you haven't, either Long Reach or Potent Hex, either is good. I would probably go with Long Reach. Once you reach Tier 3, however, of course, Mindstorm, then Death Hex, grab Oblivion for the cooldown reduction, Master of Hexes, Quick Casting. After that, probably Spell Power, and then just pick up cooldown reduction and Hex Intensity for a lot of other things. And you may see I have Ice Spikes here. I don't think you should actually go for this. I think you should get Ice Wall. I think it's a much more powerful and useful ability. Not a lot of enemies are going to be getting up close with Morgana, and you surely do not want to be putting her close to enemies, so Ice Spikes will get pretty rare use. Ice Wall, however, very good. You're going to be using it a lot. This is definitely much more a priority over Ice Wall. And after that point, you have all the cooldown reductions, you have all the hex intensities, you've picked up Long Reach, you've picked up Spell Power, you obviously have Mindstorm, you have the offensive spells you want that I just laid out. After that, you're going to have some extra points laying around. At that point, it's kind of free reign, pick up what you want to get. Next is Sir Dagonet. He's the Tyrant Old Faith alignment hero, so you're going to need those points specific to this alignment to get him. And he's a lot of fun. He's very focused on debuffing. You'll notice he actually does not have any outright damaging spells. All of them are debuffs and crowd control in some form or another. There are some specific builds that can get his damage very high, actually, but they're extremely gear dependent and it's not something you should really rely on. If you're bringing him, it's mostly going to be for his debuffing capability, and he's really, really good at it. Now, you do get him at a decent level. I believe he starts with his tier 2 unlocked. I don't remember how many points exactly, but his tier 1 is pretty standard. You've seen it on a lot of the other Arcanists. It's pretty much the same thing. You're going to take Slowing Hex, and you don't need Witchcraft to later respec to get rid of it because you do start with tier 2 accessible. You're going to grab Magical Armor with the 2 usual upgrades, and then probably Potent Hex and Blood Hex with the cooldown reduction. Going into tier 2, of course, you're taking Master of Hexes with quick casting, and then his hallmark skill, Desecrated Ground. Unique to him, it's an amazing skill, not very high damage, but it can add up more than you would think, and just applies an AoE slow as well with the right upgrades. You're picking this up, taking the AP cost reduction at first. I think the damage is going to be one of the last upgrades you pick on this, but getting Weakness and Quagmire on it as soon as possible, very, very crucial. If you still need to spend some skill points before getting into tier 3, I would just pick up Death Hex now. Moving into tier 3, Mindstorm first as usual, and then you're going to want to grab Stigma. This is an ability only Mordred shares with him. You're going to grab the AP cost reduction for a 1 AP Stigma. This is a very cheap spell, so it lets you cycle with Mindstorm a lot easier. And then Spell Power. And honestly, Long Reach and some of the upgrades on this are pretty good. He sits back a lot and just casting debuffs. So this will help buff up his damage a little bit, given how much lower it is to other Arcanists comparatively with some of the upgrades on this. And as I mentioned before, Quagmire, Miasma, gonna want those. Getting Stigma of Dishonor for the extra vulnerability on this one. And those are all the important ones, really. You can kind of mess around. There's like Terror Wings here. There's Quick Curse. This one is pretty good. It decreases the cost of the first Hex spell every round. So if you're going to take this, you just have to remember that if you're going to open your turn, open with Death Hex or Blood Hex, because Slowing Hex and Stigma cannot get reduced to 0. It does actually apply to Desecrated Ground as well. Fun interaction. It is classified as a Hex ability. You can see the tag there. So if you have this, just be careful and remember that you have it, and you don't waste it when you're casting that first spell on the turn. I think the lowest priority abilities here, though, again, as usual, is going to be Master Alchemist, Spell Reflection, and I don't actually really like Terror Wings. It's fairly useful because you can get a lot of hexes up with Dagonet, but he's fairly sedentary. A lot of Arcanists are, because you're just trying to get as many spells out in a turn as possible. You're only moving unless you absolutely need to. And because he's not moving so much, I just don't think the movement AP is that crucial for him. And as I mentioned, you can get upgrades on Long Reach to boost his damage up because it is naturally lower than other Arcanists, but I think that should be the last thing you pick up on him if you're going to pick it up. Focus on his crowd control and his debuffs. Get the damage upgrades here last, as well as the extra damage. We're going to be covering Faerie Knight next. He always slips my mind when I'm talking about the Arcanist because he's so unique and doesn't play like them at all. So it's easy to forget about, but Mindstorm wouldn't really work well with him because you're not really going to be spell spamming. But what does he get, and how should you pick it up? Well, let's get into that. You do recruit him during Act 3, so he starts fairly high level and is going to have a lot of abilities unlocked and a lot of skill points to play with because you are going to want to respec him. That's usually the case for like 95% of the heroes you recruit. You generally want to respec them when you get them. Now, the first thing you want to get, it's a little flexible because you have so many skill points to pick up, but the must-have skills I think he should start with is Teleport, upgrades on Teleport, Skirmisher, so that way you can take advantage of his unique ability to wear medium armor, magical armor. With all three of these upgrades you can see here, he is used quite frequently as a sort of tank or variant tank, off tank, whatever you want to call it. So having that extra armor is very useful for him. Grabbing Ice Shield, this is probably one of the best defensives in the game for the same reason that you're taking the armor upgrades here. The same reason you're going to want to take this here. It's very crucial for his survivability. Once you grab these, you're going to want to go back, pick up some upgrades on Lightning Strike. This is going to be his primary damage dealer. His basic attack is Lightning Strike. All of the upgrades on this are really good. I would pick up Dodge as well, because he is not going to have a lot of persistent armor. He'll have a lot for 2 hits, but it drops off heavily after that, so being able to just potentially dodge attacks entirely, very useful. So then I would grab Dodge. And then honestly, the first thing I'd pick up again would be Dodge in Tier 3. Following that up, I think it's a little bit dependent. It really depends on how you want to play him. Faerie Knight is a very flexible character. Some people like to use him as a sort of assassin, others like to use him as a tank. So depending on what you want to go for will determine what your priorities are. For me, I kind of prefer him as a tank type character. So the first thing I would get is Force Cleave. It's a very good ability, has good damage, and it has knockback. I generally don't send him out very far, to go sniping archers. I keep him near my party, so being able to knock back multiple enemies at once is very useful if they're getting up on my group and I need to reposition them and I want to avoid opportunity attacks. Following that, I think Spell Power is really good. It increases the range of all skills, so his Lightning Strike will now have a range of 2. His Force Cleave now has a range of 2. These are all very good and gives him a lot of unique flavor to him. And after that, honestly, I don't think there's anything that's super high priority. It's really up to you and how you want to build him. I think if you're going for a damage dealer style, Killing Spree is going to be very useful for when those enemy units line up and you can do like a double backstab. This will get some pretty good free kills. If you want to have him debuff a little bit, which I think fits more with the tank style, Slowing Hex is going to be a pretty crucial one. And Fire Blast I think works for both, because you never know when you're going to want some just range damage, and AoE damage is always useful. So this is something that I think is not very high priority, but something that pretty much any way you build him, this will be useful on him. I do think because he's not a spell spammer, you really don't need to pick up Blood Hex on him. Of course, you avoid Master Alchemist. And like I just said, I don't like to pick up Blood Hex on him, and if the only Hex spell I really have is Slowing Hex, I don't think he needs Master of Hexes. It's a very strong ability, I just don't think it fits well with him and how most players are going to choose to play him. And last up is going to be Merlin. He's an extremely unique Arcanist, extremely powerful, very, very strong, and a lot of weird abilities. He's very similar in playstyle to the other Arcanists, but his toolkit is very different. The first thing you'll notice is he does not have hexes, so hex intensity is a useless stat on him. Don't worry about it, so immediately you already know that he's going to be structured a bit differently. Given that his core gameplay mechanic is the same, it revolves around spell spamming, going off of Mindstorm, cheap spells with low cooldowns is going to be sort of the main thing for him. Now, you get him towards the end of Act 2, not the very end, but sort of near the end, so he will start with Tier 2 unlocked. He'll have a decent amount of skill points to mess around with, and I think the first thing you should get is Illusion, and pick up all of the upgrades on Illusion as soon as they become available. This is a very, very powerful spell, probably his strongest utility spell overall, and all of the upgrades on it are very good. Next, you're going to want Teleport. This is just very useful for retreating and repositioning. Reduce the cooldown on this. I don't think you'll need Astral Journey, but the other 3 you'll probably want to pick up too as you unlock them. And Magical Armor, of course, for this standard reason, you're going to want this on pretty much all your Arcanists. Once those are secured, I would pick up Fire Drake. This is his primary damaging spell, the one that I use 90% of the time, and it can get a lot of units if you pick up Great Serpent. You're going to want this first. This increases the tile length for Fire Drake and lets you get many more enemies. This is honestly the difference between getting 1 and 2 enemies or 2 and 3 in so many situations. Following that up, you're going to want Mind Fog. This is another very powerful crowd control ability, and getting all of the upgrades on it, other than Mind Drain, this one is not bad, but probably not nearly as strong as the other 3. Very, very good. Once you get into tier 3, obviously Mindstorm first, and then I would pick up Master of Fire. Merlin is probably one of the more damage-focused Arcanists out of the bunch, and focusing on boosting his fire damage will go a long way with him. So getting Master of Fire, all of the upgrades on it, and then Pyromania is probably the order you want to go in if you're wanting to up his damage. If you want to increase his crowd control ability a little bit more first, go for Raven Swarm. This is an okay damage spell, but it's good because it slows an enemy, and slows are always useful. He does not have slowing hex, and it will jump to a new target when you kill the person currently affected by Raven Swarm. All of the upgrades on this are okay. None of them are really amazing. I think the upgrades on this can be probably one of the last things you pick up with Merlin. After that, you can honestly, you're going to want to pick up in any order really here. Long Reach, Spell Power, and Mysticism. All of them are very good, offer different bonuses. Spell Power is probably the strongest of the three, followed by Mysticism and then Long Reach. Now, that is what I would say is his most important core assets. After that, there's some variance depending on what you want. Personally, I think Falling Star is a bit of a trap. A lot of people pick this spell very early once they unlock tier 3 because it's, this high damage 130% move in a 3x3. It's probably the highest base damage ability in a 3x3 AoE, or even in AoE in general. But it is so extremely expensive. It's 8 AP. Look at that, 8. And you can see here, I have 11 with him by default with the Essence, so he normally has 10. That leaves you with 2 AP afterward, and it's just unnecessary. Like I mentioned earlier, I use Fire Drake 90% of the time, even when I have Falling Star, so you could probably skip out on Falling Star entirely, and I don't think it will hurt your performance with Merlin at all, honestly. And instead you can shift these skill points towards other things, like grabbing extra damage here, maybe buffing up your Firebolt earlier, you can maybe grab Evasion. If you're noticing your party is fairly low on mental debuff resistance, you can grab Mental Guard. This is a pretty niche ability, but depending on your party comp, it could be fairly useful. Or maybe you want some extra defensiveness with Fog. All of these are honestly perfectly good alternatives to Falling Star. It's not bad, but I do think a lot of players overrate its effectiveness, and honestly, this is a low priority ability to the point where I think you could skip it and pick something else depending on your own personal taste. And that wraps up all of the Arcanists now. I hope this was useful and I was concise in explaining my thought process and why I prioritize the skills that I do and then which ones I go back for later. If anything was sort of unclear, feel free to ask me in the comments. I'll be happy to answer them. And yeah, thanks for watching.